It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster. Bad news for the Chancellor. Inflation went back up last month.
I am determined as Chancellor of the Exchequer to help relieve some of that pressure that families have been facing.
If you put up national insurance on businesses, prices go up. If you go out and borrow huge amounts of money and splurge on the spending side, prices go up.
Rachel Reeves says she'll go further and faster with her plans. But is there a split at the top of government over economic policy? The Deputy Prime Minister apparently urged the Chancellor to raise taxes rather than cut spending. The government makes its strongest criticism yet of Israeli actions in Gaza.
I want to put on record today that we're horrified by the escalation from Israel.
Also today, should the Conservatives form an electoral pact with Reform?
We want to come together, we want to cooperate, we want to put the national interest ahead of party pride.
And we'll be live in the Commons for Prime Minister's questions at noon. Joining me today, Labour MP Dawn Butler, Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell, Rachel Cunliffe of The New Statesman and Tim Stanley of The Daily Telegraph. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. Let's start with the inflation figure. BBC News headline here, UK inflation rate jumps to 3.5% from 2.6% in April as higher household bills kick in. Let's get a reaction from the panel, starting with you, Dawn.
It's obviously disappointing, as the Chancellor has said. But I think the other thing is that all of the things, the levers that the government's putting into place, so making sure there's a rise in the minimum wage, making sure that, you know, wages have risen higher than inflation, but people admittedly might not be feeling that, and
right.
you want to feel better off. And so there's still a long way to go.
Right. What's your reaction, Andrew?
Well, it's very alarming, and those of us who grew up in an age when inflation was very high know that it is a thief that steals everyone's income during the night. So I'm very concerned indeed about the level of inflation. And I would say this, the Labour government is absolutely right to champion growth, but almost all the things they've done since they came into office have had the reverse effect. If you want growth, as Mel was saying a moment ago, Mel Stride, then you don't go and ramp up costs on jobs, which deflate the economy in terms of trying to get
inflation was in double figures under the last government.
When we left office, as you know perfectly well, Dawn, it was back to 2%.
But then you made all these
now nearly double what it was when you inherited.
But you made all these unfunded spending commitments, so that was never going to last, was it, in reality?
Let's not refight the last election. Let's focus on the inflation figures. The inflation figures which you inherited were about 2%. They're now almost double that. If you want growth, and you're absolutely right to want growth, then you shouldn't do all these things which are inimical to growth and are damaging the economy.
So are you saying that it's government policy that has driven that inflation rate?
I think the mistakes that the government have made, which are legion since last July, are leading the economy in the wrong direction for achieving what Labour rightly want to achieve, which is higher growth.
As you said, people aren't feeling better off. When do you think they will?
Well, as soon as, hopefully soon. But
it's going in the wrong direction, though, isn't it, in terms of the prices going up?
Yeah, but the thing is that there are other things. The government isn't, I must admit, our government comms isn't great in terms of saying to people...
Never mind the comms, it's what's actually happening. The comms can't disguise bad decisions.
But all the decisions haven't been bad, Andrew.
Well, we see the effect on the economy, which has just been put before us. And the inflation is a very important indicator.
But
it's not going well. It's not going well.
It will fluctuate. And yes, it is disappointing, the figures today, but it will fluctuate and everybody accepts that.
Right. The Bank of England has said it expects inflation to peak at 3.7% between July and September this year before dropping back to its 2% target. But to give a bit of context, how bad is this?
Well, this was expected, as you say, by the Bank of England, and the good news is that the Bank of England expects it to be temporary and a short, sharp shock of inflation, as long as it's temporary, is less damaging to the economy than long-running inflation. I think the real worry is, as Dawn was saying, how does it make people feel in their pockets? And one of the things that is driving this level of inflation is literally every bill has gone up. Water bills have gone up, council tax has gone up, energy, internet bills, everything is getting more expensive. And if people consistently feel that things are getting more expensive, their lives aren't getting better, and also the government has less money because things are more expensive for the government too, with inflation, it makes it very difficult to get out of that spiral.
I mean, Rachel Rees says she wants to go faster and further with her economic plans. How difficult is this, or is it a blip?
It's always interesting to listen to Tories and Labour blame each other and to remember how the roles were reversed when the other was in government. So the structural reason why we have high inflation is things like Ukraine and COVID, which is still being felt. The two of the biggest things which have gone up, driving up inflation, are water bills and electricity. Because the energy price cap has gone up. I see no connection between Labour Party policy and those two things. Now, you could argue, the Tories could reasonably argue that that Labour is making it worse in the long run by adding costs onto things like employment with national insurance increase, or through things like the net zero policy by restricting the different range of fuels that we could be using. So you could argue that in the future, Labour is adding to the pressures which will drive inflation. But the reality is that the cost of living is going up. And that would have happened if the Tories had won the last election. It's just simply something we have to get through.
Rachel?
I wasn't expecting to agree with Tim so early on. Actually, he's absolutely right. The fundamentals of our economy is what's driving it. And it's happening in other countries too. And the energy prices is a key one with what's going on in Europe. And it's very difficult to see what quick fixes any government of any party could make to alleviate that.
Well, petrol prices are down. So this is not like the 1970s where there's stagflation across the entire economy, where all prices are going up. It's sectoral. And it's in response to historic crises which have left these problems in the economy that were so big, it's still taking a long time to weed them out.
Well, that is true to some extent, but there are other factors which are in the control of the government, which are stoking, as you rightly say, stoking inflation for the future. As I say, you're all far too young to remember what it was like when we had very bad inflation. But inflation is a real enemy of everyone, whether you're a saver, a pensioner or an earner. It steals from everybody, and the government must take the level of inflation extremely seriously.
Well, it was quite recent that it was 11%.
I'm old enough to remember high inflation in the early 90s under the John Major government, which was fought by higher interest rates. It was caused in part by an overheating economy.
Yes.
So again, this happens under Labour and Tory.
Well, on that, let's talk about some of the choices the government has made and discuss the issues around welfare, because the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, has given a speech today doubling down on Labour's cuts, £5 billion worth of disability benefits cuts. Let's hear part of her speech to the Institute for Public Policy Research.
Unless we reform the system to help those who can work to do so, unless we get social security spending on a more sustainable footing, and unless we ensure public money is focused on those with the greatest need and is spent in ways that have the best chance of improving people's lives, the risk is the welfare state won't be there for people who really need it in future. That is why we are grasping the nettle of reform, not for the sake of it, but to ensure the welfare state lasts for generations to come.
Dawn, do you agree with that analysis of the welfare state? It has to be there for people who need it. There is a moral mission to tackle the number of people who are stuck on welfare.
Well, I think, first of all, the welfare state is a safety net for people. And we have to ensure that, as a society, we understand not only why it's there, but we support that. You know, there's no way that we should be saying people who are severely disabled, who can't work, should be forced into work. That is nonsensical, and also not the society that we live in. I used to work for the Employment Service, so I agree that it needs reform, right? It's always needed reform. I was in the Employment Service when, the Tories were in government, and it was an absolute kind of mess.
And does reform to you mean actually cutting the level of benefits to groups of people?
Reform to me means that we give people help, as much help as we possibly can, as soon as possible. We didn't used to do that when I used to work in the Employment Service, and actually that is something that the Minister is bringing in, which I think is a good thing. So I think we need to talk about the good stuff, right?
Well, let's look at the figures as well, because the Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts that total spending on health and disability benefits would rise from £64.7 billion in 23-24 to over £100 billion in 29-30. Is that sustainable?
Well, no, but I disagree with the reform being linked to saving money. I think that's the wrong approach.
All right, what about the moral mission, Tim? Because that's how the government has also set out its justification and explanation for making those cuts.
But it hasn't quite, has it? Because listening to that speech, Liz Kendall said, we're doing this not for its own sake. And that's the interesting thing, because I think the Tories probably would, because they believe that as far as possible, people should live independently of the state. Whereas I think part of the reason why Labour's failing to explain and sell this welfare reform is because it's trying to say we still love welfare, we're still going to spend the money, we're still going to help people, but we're also going to kick them off it. It doesn't make much sense. They're also going against the tide, a sort of a cultural tide the last few years, which is much greater awareness of the role of mental health in people's physical health. And much of that added number, there are something like 9 million people who are economically inactive in this country now. Some of that number has been added to by people with mental anguish as well as physical anguish. And what the reform really did, if being honest, is it very bluntly said, there's a whole class of people we're going to stop financing. We're just going to cut off those people who decided actually they can work. Just go out and get a job, please. So Labour's got to explain why, on the one hand, it's the party of care and compassion. And on the other hand, it's taken a very bloody-minded decision to tell an entire generation of people, actually, we think you're just being wet and you need to go and get a job.
Right. What's happened to Labour values?
Well, I appreciate that is how, what Tim's saying, and that's how some people will view it because of, as I said before, Andrew said comms, but I think comms is actually very important.
Communication, how the message is being communicated.
And, and it isn't, and we have to be firm in what Labour values are. And I will admit that I don't think that this government is selling Labour's values or even showcasing Labour's values in the way that it should. So I would accept that criticism.
Andrew, what did you make of what Tim said about Conservatives? They would cut for the sake of it.
No, I largely agree with what Tim said. But first of all, if you look at the figures from before COVID to now, there's far too many people who are of working age who the number on benefits has increased exponentially, and we've got to address that point. So I support Labour doing that. But I have to say that I think I'm stand to be correct. I don't think the Tories have ever cut disability benefits. And I was a junior and young minister in what was then the Department of Social Security under Peter Lilly in the 90s. And I learnt about welfare cuts the following. First of all, you cannot take money that poorer people in society have off them. If they've already been given it, you can't take it off them. It doesn't work. No government really has ever been able to do that. There are only two ways in which you can cut benefits, and the welfare bill has got to be reduced. One is by narrowing the gateways into it, and that is probably the way to address the huge increase since COVID. But the other thing is by freezing certain benefits. But as I say, that I think I'm right in saying that a Tory government has never cut disability payments, and indeed, I remember in cabinet.
Would you support it now?
Cutting disability benefits?
Yes.
No, I think that there are other benefits, not disability benefits.
Which ones?
Cut. Well, I think I think narrowing the gateways, which have led to such a big increase since COVID.
I mean, I think that some of the stuff that Liz Kendall has said in regards to people trying work, so you won't lose your benefit if you try work. I think that's a good thing, because that scares people sometimes. Sometimes £1 billion to help people into work with supportive services, helping employers so they can support people with disability. We should recognise people's mental health. That's an important progress of society, that we understand that mental health and physical health, has an effect on people. All of that we should be recognising.
Can I just say also that, I remember in Cabinet in 2010 when George Osborne wanted to cut the cold weather payments, and David Cameron and the cabinet wouldn't do it. So we wouldn't have. I
think the Liberal Democrats always claimed they were the ones who stopped the Conservatives doing that.
I was there. It was David Cameron.
Oh, it was David Cameron.
Can I just say that I think Dawn's making a really important point on people who try work or who are disincentivised from trying to get into work because the benefit system is so complicated, so difficult, and once you're on it, it can feel very precarious to do anything that could put that stability at risk. Work is precarious. You don't necessarily know if you're going to have a job from one week to the next. People have childcare commitments, and there are all kinds of disincentives baked into the system that prevent people who would like to try working from being able to do it. So I think reforms to the system that make that pathway easier are really important.
But what about her claim about grasping the nettle of welfare reform, not for the sake of it, but to save it?
Well, I think her point is that if you don't do something, you're going to end up with no social safety net at all, and it's entirely going to disintegrate. Well, looking at some of the numbers, they really are quite terrifying. I think, though, to think about it in terms of saving money is probably the wrong way to do it. You can say if we make these reforms, we will encourage people to go into work, they will get off benefits, and therefore, in the long run, money will be saved. That is a different way of looking at it to going, we need to save X amount of money, what do we have to cut to get there? That's a fundamentally different approach.
I mean, we spoke to Clive Lewis, your colleague, yesterday on the programme. He said the Labour government's policies, such as the winter fuel payment cuts to pensioners and disability benefit cuts, are not in line with Labour values, and that people on the doorstep are disappointed with this Labour government. Are you comfortable that he is at odds with the policies of your government, and you're more in line with the Conservatives and Reform who agree with them?
I'm not in line with the Conservatives and Reform.
On this policy,
don't please put me in that basket.
Welcome.
No, please, no. But I agree with what Rachel just said, and I think that communication is what's missing from the government. And I agree with Clive. And you know, I've got a 25-year-old working for me, and she's like, this doesn't sound like a Labour government. And this is what a lot of people are saying. This is what we're hearing on the doorstep. And we do have to sound a lot more like a Labour government. And we have to talk about Labour values. And we have to, you know...
But to pick up on what Andrew said, it was the new Labour government that then cut benefits for single parents. In the 1960s, it was Harold Wilson's government that said if you're not looking for work, you lose your benefits. Labour is the Labour Party. It's the party of workers. It's not a party of welfare dependency. And I understand it's obviously always had a socialist concern for the poor and those who can't work, etc. But it is fundamentally a party that wants people to work and live independently.
It's the safety net. You know, people used to be 4 wage packets away from being homeless. 14 years of a Tory government, people were 1 wage packet away from being homeless. So it's not just the poor, it's a safety net. And that's the sort of society that we want to live in.
But what the government would say, and there's no one here today to defend it, so I'll do the job, is...
They'll be delighted.
The problem is the definition of the safety net has expanded too much. Such that we're now supporting people who, as I say, might be depressed or anxious rather than helping them into work. Or we're giving winter fuel payments to super rich pensioners who don't need that cash. What's that really got to do with socialism?
So that's 2 different things there. So I agree, winter fuel payments can be means tested. Again, the way it was communicated, completely wrong.
But otherwise you support the policy.
But means testing, you shouldn't be giving winter fuel payments to millionaires who are pensioners who say, I don't need this money, I'm going to give it to charity. Let's just means test it. I mean, I think that's fine.
All right, well, but let's have a look at this then. A headline in the Daily Telegraph, the Deputy Prime Minister demanding tax raid on savers. She thinks there's another way of raising money. Secret memo reveals clash at top of Cabinet between Deputy Prime Minister and Rachel Reeves. She was wanting to push Rachel Reeves to raise taxes by £3 billion to £4 billion in the spring statement instead of announcing £5 billion in welfare cuts. Do you agree with Angela Rayner?
I'm not across all the details of what
But broadly, would you agree on
broadly,
taxing well-off people, savers or better-off people, rather than cuts to welfare?
Well, I would like to see a wealth tax. So I'd like to see a tax on people who have assets of more than £10 million, because that will bring in a lot of money into the Treasury. And, you know, then we wouldn't have to be having these conversations cloaked in this is going to save us money by, you know, harming disabled people. So I'd like to see a wealth tax.
What do you say about a wealth tax?
I think it's a very bad idea. One of the problems, and it affects all parties, is that we live in a country where people want low American-style taxes and high European social provision. And the fact is that politicians of all parties fudge that, and it isn't, in the end, it isn't possible. And I think in this country people are very highly taxed. I certainly wouldn't support a wealth tax. And you can see in the extension of what Labour is doing with non-doms that actually what you're doing is driving wealthy people out of this country, which will diminish the tax take. So I think tax in this country is at an all-time high. It is too high, and government should be focusing on trying to diminish the tax burden.
What do you make of what Angela Angela Rayner is said to have tried to demand from the Chancellor a different path, perhaps more in line with Labour values in the way that Clive Lewis, I should say, stated yesterday.
Well, I think everyone really expects taxes to have to go up later this year in some form or another. The type of taxes that Angela Rayner is suggesting here would be aimed, she would say, at the wealthiest and therefore wouldn't break the promises that Labour made on no tax rises for working people. The problem with those kind of tax rises is that they raise relatively little money. You need to pull one of the big tax levers if you really want to make a difference. But just to come back to the idea of a wealth tax, it looks very appealing on paper. The numbers look very attractive. But in countries that have tried it, the actual amount of money for the government that you can raise through them is often much, much, much less than it looks on paper. What a government could do, a government with a strong majority, perhaps, and 4 years left on its parliamentary term, is make serious reforms to council tax, which is based on valuations from the 90s, is incredibly regressive if you look at how different properties in different places in the country are taxed, and would be a way of taxing wealth without imposing an additional tax and actually having a much more progressive tax system, and yet somehow nobody wants to talk about it.
Well, they don't want to do it, certainly. But what do you say in response to the fact that a wealth tax, in the way you've explained it, just wouldn't raise the sort of money you're talking about?
Well, I mean, from what I've read, Rachel, my understanding, it would raise. I mean, and there are millionaires who are asking to be taxed more. They're like, tax us a little bit more. We can afford it. Assets over £10 million. So, but the details would have to be fleshed out. But it's the direction of travel. It's like what we would like to see as a direction of travel.
Well, and it's exposed, this clash at the top of government. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, that Angela Rayner, who was also suggesting taxing the pensioners' lifetime allowance to try and raise money in different ways to spending cuts and, in other ways, the fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves doesn't want to break.
You did mention this was in the Telegraph. This was a Telegraph scoop. That's the important thing to bear in mind. The interesting question is why Rachel Reeves didn't take her up on the offer. And that's because there is a tension between the government's stated aim to grow the economy and its traditional concern for protecting the welfare state. Those two things are now in contention. Why? Because we now live in a world in which capital and labour is mobile. And simply, if you tax the middle classes any more than you currently do, they'll move abroad. And if you do that, they'll take their tax away with them, which means that the public services will no longer have the money and they'll collapse.
And it's happening before our eyes, actually. It's because of the non-doms.
Probably already happening.
I mean, there are reports of millionaire flight, and they are reports, but that the
flight on a private jet, not many of them.
Yeah, but the point is not that. The point is that they're not paying the tax which funds the health service
and, the education,
because they've gone, so you can't tax them. That's
but a lot of them have these tax. This is the other thing that the government's doing, is clamping down on tax avoidance.
Yeah, well, all
which
governments
actually,
do that.
no, actually.
No, we had huge programmes clamping down.
But also,
and we should
tax
quite
avoidance grew under the
also have to push back
government.
against the millionaire thing. Angela was talking about freezing the highest rate. Okay, so that's what currently now is the income for that.
45%.
But
I mean, what is the income at which you pay that?
Oh, 125,000.
Right. Whenever you
something?
say that on the BBC, you always get angry letters. But I'm going to say it. That for many people is an upper middle class income. It's not a super rich income, especially if you're a professional trying to support an entire family while one member of the family stays at home. If you tax that anymore, you're killing the middle class dream, which is what many people aspire to, especially when they do things like go into the well-paid professions or set up a small business. Defending someone who earns over 6 figures never sounds good on telly. I get that.
No.
But it is the golden goose that lays the eggs that pays for all your services. So you don't want to chase those people away.
How are you going to vote for the proposed disability benefit cuts when they come to the Commons next month? You're voting?
At the moment, I'm not able to vote for it.
You're not?
No.
What would have to change?
The conversation that we've had around the table today, the direction of travel, how we make sure that people are protected, the most vulnerable in society are protected. That's what I want to see.
And you'd vote against?
At the moment, yeah, that's my thoughts.
Let's leave it there. You can now listen to Politics Live on the live news stream on BBC Sounds. Just go to the live dial at the top of the BBC Sounds homepage and tap on live news. Yesterday, the UK government stepped up its actions against Israel's offensive in Gaza. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, was in the Commons yesterday and had strong words for the Israeli government.
It's morally unjustifiable. It's wholly disproportionate. It's utterly, utterly counterproductive. whatever Israeli ministers claim, this is not the way to bring the hostages safely home. Nearly all the hostages have been freed through negotiations, not military force.
Let's talk to a former member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, Ruth Wasserman Landau. She joins us from Tel Aviv. Welcome to you. What's your reaction, first of all, to the action that the government has now taken? Suspending talks on UK-Israel trade deal, summoning the Israeli ambassador and imposing fresh sanctions on a number of West Bank settlers.
Thank you for having me and for this platform. I think it's completely counterproductive to stop talks and negotiations and really have this kind of policy of sanctions towards allies, because the Hamas, a designated terrorist organization leading the Gaza Strip and holding the Palestinians, not only the Israelis, hostage within the Gaza Strip, are in fact not only against the Jews in Israel, but also against the UK and the British people, as well as other people in and throughout Europe. And this is very unfortunate.
Right.
So the pressure can be laid onto Israel, but it can and should be also carried out against the Hamas. And unfortunately, we do not see that.
Well, hang on, Ruth. Let me just stop you there, because you said and you mentioned that UK and Israel are allies. The UK government has stood squarely behind Israel over the last few years and says that Israel has a right to defend herself. They've given military and diplomatic aid. And because they're an ally, the country and the government has a right to criticise allies when they feel that their military action, in this case the offensive, the blockade of aid and food into Gaza, has gone too far. Do you accept that?
So I would like to say the following. The right to criticise is one thing, and the right to use sanctions and to stop all talks, whereas really supporting a terrorist organisation is a completely different thing. And I'll say why. You see, I would have loved to see the UK actually bordering with a country or with an entity or with a piece of land like Gaza, because what we've experienced in the last 20-odd years are rockets flying on civilians. This has not been reported in any of the international
Well, why doesn't the Israeli government let journalists, but why doesn't the Israeli government allow journalists into the Gaza Strip and then they can see for themselves? Because you talk about Hamas. UK has not supported Hamas in any way.
I'll explain. It has not supported Hamas, but by saying to Israel that it will use sanctions and it will stop and prevent Israel from continuing to truly defend its people. By the way, the Hamas can stop the war in 1 minute. 1 minute. All we need is our people back. There are 58 of our people still. And Secretary Lamy has said that the military action has not brought the people back, but I completely disagree. Well, the military action has put pressure on the Hamas, which has brought them to the negotiating table. Now,
all right. Well, let's talk about the success of the military. But let's talk about the success of the military operation by Israel. But hang on, you have two main objectives. When I say you, I mean Netanyahu and the Israeli government. One is to bring back the hostages. Well, there are still remaining hostages even after years of the military offensive. And the other objective is to defeat and destroy Hamas. It's still operating. So again, would you admit that this military offensive is just not working?
No, I would not agree. First of all, I have to explain. The military operatives in the Gaza Strip, the Hamas, have been throwing rockets on Israeli civilians for almost 20 years. 20 years. This has not been reported. Finally, there were operations here and there going in and back and forth and so on. On October 7th, when they did the horrific massacre, murder, burning, rape, and so on against the civilians in Israel, then the real war started. It's not years, it's a year and almost 9 months, which is a very long time for Israelis as well. By the way, I want to make sure that the audience knows that I'm not in and of this coalition or the government. In fact, I'm a former politician of the opposition and still am.
Right, but let's talk about the civilian. Yes, but Ruth,
nor am I a spokesperson for this. And yet, I want to answer your question. The two things that you're talking about, 197 hostages have been brought back, not because we were nice and sensitive and kind and so on, but because we've used military power to bring down a lot of the leadership of the Hamas. In fact, we've brought down the vast majority of the leadership of the Hamas that have basically murdered people, not to mention only Jewish and Israeli, but also foreign Western people, and that's what they indoctrinate their poor, tragic people.
Ruth, the one thing we haven't talked about is the civilian population in Gaza and whether the action is proportionate. I hear you about the 20 years of attacks by Hamas, but Hamas is not the civilian... Hang on. Hamas is not the civilian population. You see it as a terrorist organisation that doesn't really care about the welfare of its own people either. So how is denying food, blockading aid to a civilian population that is on the brink of starvation, according to almost every aid agency and several foreign governments, going to make the situation better?
So that's a very good question. And as a mother to 4 children, I have absolutely no pleasure and absolutely no fun in knowing the children do not get food. But the situation is not black and white. The situation is such that the huge amount of humanitarian aid, medicines, fuels, food and water that was brought in was stolen by the Hamas, was taken into their own storage places, and what they did to their own people, and you yourself had said that, they broke their feet, their legs and arms, and we did not document.
But arguably, you're adding to their pain. Ruth, we haven't got any more time, but
God forbid. Now the government is beginning to again bring in humanitarian aid because you are right. There is no wish and there is no sense in starving people. The problem is to find a mechanism, and this has not been found. And the constructive thing would be to find it and to help us find it, how not to get it to the Hamas murderers who killed their own people, but to the people themselves.
Ruth Wasserman-Landau, thank you very much for joining us. Dawn Butler, listening to that, do you think the government's actions are justified, having listened to that interview?
I think the first thing to know is they say the first casualty of war is the truth. And I feel a lot of what's being played out in the media, we don't get to the truth. And when you hear that there's going to be 14,000 babies will die if they don't get food, and that's by every organisation that's even close to being in there. And it's like, if you want to know the truth, you should have journalists, should be allowed, independent journalists should be allowed in to be able to tell the truth. Now, I fought really hard for one of my constituents, Noam, his mum, Ada, was a hostage. And I worked really hard to get her released. And, you know, night and day. And I remember talking we were in a community meeting, and I started talking about it, and I started crying. And the Met Police offered me help, some counselling, what they do with their negotiators. And I think to myself, how can anybody, and I tell that story because I think, how can anybody not work as hard as they possibly can to get hostages released? The hostages have only ever been released during a ceasefire, not during the war when the fighting has stopped. That's the only time we've seen hostages released.
So do you think the government actions, the sanctions, the suspending of trade talks will help bring hostages home and stop this war?
Well, I hope so, but I actually think ultimately our government will need to go further.
Right.
Further and faster.
How? But first of all, let me get your views. Andrew, do you support the government's actions?
So I had responsibility for this before the election in the Commons, and I think that the government's reaction yesterday is unbalanced. The reason I say that is, of course, we are all of us horrified by the humanitarian position in Gaza. But I see that Hamas issued a press release welcoming the position of the British government. The reason I say it's unbalanced is because it would have been very helpful if the British government had said up front that Hamas can stop all of this in 1 minute if they go and release the hostages. They are holding these hostages and they should send them back. And they're also using innocent Palestinians in Gaza as human shields. So the onus should be on Hamas from... I'm making the point that the humanitarian position is absolutely dire and Israel should do everything it can to alleviate that. But we've had a lot of crying wolf about famine. Some months ago, people were saying there was a famine in Gaza. There wasn't. What there was, a few hundred miles further away, in Sudan, in Darfur, was a famine, and today 600,000 people are starving to death in Darfur. We need to have a proportionate approach and a balanced approach, which puts the blame on Hamas, who can end this tomorrow.
Can I just say that if it wasn't true that people are starving and hungry, then how comes Netanyahu's now said we will let a minimum number of aid trucks in? So but he knows then, doesn't he, that there used to be 600 aid trucks. So even letting in 100 isn't enough. So he knows this.
The point is this, that now there is real starvation and difficulty, as you correctly say. There wasn't before, and people were crying wolf. They were making a political point saying that there was a famine. There wasn't. And what I'm saying is there needs to be a balanced approach and focus on the people who can stop this, which is Hamas.
But withholding food cannot be used as a weapon of war. And there are certainly many people across Europe, in all parties, who think that now Israel is using withholding food as a weapon of war, breaking international law. So do you think these actions by the government are justified?
I have to correct a couple of things that were said in the interview you did. One is the impression that the Western media has never covered rocket fire from the occupied territories into Israel. We've covered it a great deal. A second is she referred to the government stopping talks and imposing sanctions. The talks are in relation to a trade deal. They have nothing to do with the ability of Israel to defend itself. And the sanctions... sorry?
It's symbolic.
It's symbolic. No, I know, but the sanctions are aimed at people linked to the settler movement in the West Bank.
Yes.
In other words, what the government has done is very small fry, considering what it is accusing the Israeli government of doing.
Do you think they should go further, the government, then? Should they sanction members of Netanyahu's cabinet?
Possibly. I suspect that whatever we do will not be as significant as whatever the United States does, and that if Labour wants to change policy, it might be better focused on trying to get Trump to intervene, because historically, Israeli governments have only really responded to when Washington has threatened some kind of diplomatic or financial isolation. But I have to ask the Tories and Labour, what does Netanyahu have to do for you to finally decide that he's gone too far and that Britain should actually be suspending other forms of aid and implying other kinds of sanctions?
Andrew?
Can I say that the splash, not in the Telegraph but in the Times, UK ready to sanction top Israelis over Gaza. We don't normally talk about sanctioning, but as David Cameron has said, that the Tories before the election were preparing to sanction Ben Gvir and Smotrich.
They're the members.
I'm very who are senior right-wing members of the coalition cabinet.
Purifying Gaza.
The fact that Labour now, almost a year later, are getting round to it, I think is remiss. That is something which should have been done already.
Yes.
I think we have to be clear here that whatever the UK government does, whatever the French government does and the Canadian government does, because that was a united international effort yesterday, Israel really isn't paying that much attention. I think.
Although they're paying attention to the actions they've been taking and protesting about it.
But I think Tim's point that it's intervention from America that will make a difference is an important one. I also think that this word proportionate, disproportionate is very difficult to apply to a context where you have a state that is facing a terrorist organisation whose stated aim is the entire destruction of that state wholesale. I think the situation in Gaza is horrific, and I didn't disagree with a single word that David Lammy or Keir Starmer said in the chamber last night about it being abominable and about it being, I think monstrous was the word that Lammy used. But it is all the context, all the questions about this particular humanitarian crisis cannot be answered without further conversations about what happens next and how you can destroy the Hamas terrorist group.
Well, let's leave
said
it.
They want to repeat it, of course. They've made it clear they want to repeat October.
Well, let's leave it there for the moment, because we're coming up to Prime Minister's questions in 7 or 8 minutes' time. Perhaps we can look inside the chamber. It is filling up, as you would expect, as we approach midday. Let's talk about the state of the Conservative Party, because Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Cabinet member and Conservative MP, has been calling for an electoral pact between Reform and the Conservatives. This is what he told my colleague Victoria Derbyshire on Newsnight last night.
I'm saying that most people in the Conservative Party, most people in Reform, broadly share the same views, the same desire for the country. We saw yesterday the country being sold down the river, putting in the command and control of the European Union once again. People in Reform and the Conservative Party don't want that. If we oppose each other, we let Labour win large majorities, and that makes no sense. So we want to come together, we want to cooperate, we want to put the national interest ahead of party pride.
Do you broadly share the same views as people in Reform, and would you embrace coming together?
Well, of course, we do share some of the same views, but the thing where I disagree with Jacob is that Reform has made it clear they want to destroy the Tory party, so it's quite difficult to talk in the terms that he says. The answer for the Tories is to remember that the Conservative Party is a broad church. We lost 6 seats to Reform and many times that to the Lib Dems. And the way in which we will recover people who declined to vote for us at the last election is by coming up with the right policy solutions, which is why Kemi is right to focus on policy, so that people who deserted will say the Tories have done the work. These are policies which I agree with, and I can support them again.
Right, well, let's have a look at the general election voting intention poll tracker, the BBC. You can see there Reform on 30%, Labour on 22%, the Conservatives on 18%. It takes an average, by the way, across the year, and the Liberal Democrats on 14%. Are you sure you don't want to have a pact with Reform if you want to keep Labour out at the next election?
Look, I remember after 97 when the Tories were in a pretty dire state as well, in spite of the brilliant leadership of William Hague. And it got to the point when the Tories had been completely written off. And I remember
Reform wasn't there then, was it?
I remember Tony Blair saying to his party at the party conference, don't think these Tories have gone away. They're only sleeping. They will be back. The Tory party will be back, and we will get back by getting the right policies.
But the big difference now is the Reform Party is in existence and splitting, broadly speaking, the vote on the right.
Yes.
Do you think the two parties should form some sort of electoral pact, and would that be enough to defeat Labour?
I had a look at the polls from 97 and 98 the other day because I'm sad, and I found that I couldn't find one in which the Tories went behind the Lib Dems. They remained in second place. They were still psychologically the party of opposition. People still thought in a two-party way. Now people are not only thinking but voting in a 4 or 5 party way, even without PR. That's the extraordinary thing. True, Reform's at 29%, but it ain't at 40%. So the country is split, the public has de-aligned, and the problem is the Tories are competing in this market and they've not really got much to offer. People still hate them because of the experience of the government. They've diluted their philosophy, they're a bit low on talent, their organisation is pretty poor and the money's running out.
Right.
And
you might as well pack up and go home on the basis of that, Andrew.
So what Jacob is doing is a desperate thing. He's saying let's attach ourselves to Reform because that's what it will mean to the voters and crucially to Nigel Farage. But Nigel Farage will refuse it. I'm afraid I wish I could press fast forward and go forward 10 years because we're going to have a general election in which the right is split and Labour wins yet again. We're going to have negotiations over coalition. We're going to have a new party emerge like in the form of Canada. I wish we could do it in the next 6 months, but unfortunately it feels like we just have to endure 10 years of left-wing government.
It's very dangerous to predict, particularly about the future. In 1981, when the SDP were over 50%...
You only ever predict about the future.
Well, you know what I mean. Very dangerous to prophesy, particularly about it. But the point is, in 1981, the SDP were over 50% in the polls. Everyone believed
and Labour was out of power for 18 years.
And everyone believed the SDP were going to sweep the board. They didn't.
No one thinks out of Reform, but the point is it splits the opposition. No one thinks Reform will fill a government.
Some people think that.
Are there defections? Are there more defections about to happen?
By the way,
Any of your colleagues in despair?
I saw that Reform were briefing that Jacob might stand for. It's completely untrue. Jacob is a Tory to his bootstraps and he would never leave the Tory party.
I just want to make a point about the idea of a Reform-Tory pact. I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of why people are supporting Reform. I've reported on Reform, I've gone to Reform events, I've spoken to Reform supporters. They are not supporting Reform because they think Reform is a more radical, more right-wing version of the Conservative Party. They are supporting Reform because they think the Conservative Party is fundamentally broken and therefore an electoral pact will not convince them.
I think they are supporting Reform because they think both Labour and the Tories are not delivering. And that is why a policy solution is the right answer.
Any policies, any ideas?
So where are they?
We've got, well, but they mustn't be rushed. Kemi Kemi Badenoch has set up a number of groups, just as David Cameron did in 2005. Those groups under David Cameron were pivotal in us securing power at the next election. If Kemi does the work, if these groups are on the ball and they report wisely, then we will win back much of the support that we lost.
Is it about to be your last PMQs?
That wasn't what I was queuing up. I'm almost thinking maybe I should change my mind and not leave.
Stay on.
It is my last Prime Minister's Questions as presenter and my last day tomorrow, and we'll do more of that, of course, tomorrow. I thought you were going to say something about reform and the Conservatives. But yes, I'm looking forward to it as it starts, no doubt, in a moment or two's time. In terms of reform, it's also a big threat to Labour, of course, in many constituencies. How do you think the government should deal with that threat?
Well, the only bit that I agree with Andrew, and I quite enjoyed, that conversation.
I'm sure.
Is that sticking to your core values. And actually, I don't think Labour should be talking about reform this, reform that, or, Nigel Farage.
Why not?
Because I think if we stick to our core values, if we have really good policies as a Labour government, people will vote for us. Because I agree, people are voting for reform, not because they think they're going to form the next government, it's because they're annoyed with the,
Is reform just a protest party?
No, I think many people in reform really do believe that reform will form the next government.
I think there's two different...
I think it stopped being a protest party.
Yeah, I think there's reform voters and people who vote for reform, which I think are two different groups of people.
Well, let's go into Prime Minister's questions.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, my deepest condolences, and I'm sure those of the whole House, are with the families and friends of Jenny, Martin and David, tragically killed in the fire in Bicester last week. May I also welcome to the gallery Jo Coburn, the mother of Olivia. I'm always humbled by those with the courage to respond to appalling heartbreak by campaigning for change. And I know the whole House will pay tribute to her extraordinary courage and extraordinary resolve. Mr. Speaker, because of the action taken by this government, the UK is now the fastest growing economy in the G7. Interest rates have been cut 4 times, and we've secured our 3rd trade deal in 3 weeks. India, the US and the EU. Deals in the national interest that improve the lives of working people and businesses across the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Labour government has been in power now for almost 12 months. So when will the Prime Minister stop defying the will of the British people, stop dancing around the subject and stop all illegal immigration into the United Kingdom, which has been rising under his watch?
It was the last government that lost control of immigration. Record numbers on net migration, lost control of the borders. We're bringing forward legislation to give law enforcement the greatest possible powers. What are they doing? They're voting against it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst the economy is showing signs of improving, many pensioners are still impacted by the cost of living crisis. People in Luton who have worked hard all their lives, seeing their precious savings slip away. So can the Prime Minister tell us what measures he will take to help struggling pensioners in towns like mine?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know the economy was left in an absolute mess by the Tories. We had to stabilise the economy with tough decisions, but the right decisions. Because of those decisions, the economy is beginning to improve. Those growth figures last year, the highest growth in the G7, interest rate cuts, 4 in a row, 3 trade deals. But I recognise that people are still feeling the pressure of the cost of living crisis, including pensioners. And as the economy improves, we want to make sure people feel those improvements in their days as their lives go forward. And that is why we want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. As you would expect, Mr. Speaker, we will only make decisions we can afford. That is why we will look at that as part of a fiscal event.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch. Mr. Speaker, it's extraordinary listening to that last answer from the Prime Minister. Inflation was 2% when Conservatives left office. 2%. It's now nearly double that. When will he recognise that it's Labour's budget driving up inflation?
I think what she forgot to say was over 11% on their watch, and she didn't say a word. I am confident those numbers will come down, Mr. Speaker. The Bank of England is confident those numbers will come down. That's why we've seen 4 interest rates in a row. But I notice she can't resist grabbing any opportunity to talk the country down. She doesn't mention the growth figures, the interest rate figures, record investment, wages up more than prices, 200,000 jobs created, 4 trade deals. And the reason, Mr. Speaker, they haven't learned, they haven't changed, and as George Osborne said, she doesn't have a credible economic plan.
Mr. Speaker, this is laughable from the Prime Minister. He knows that inflation was brought down by us to 2%, bang on target. We were reacting to a war in Ukraine that brought inflation up all over Europe. While he is doing trade deals with countries like the US and India, their inflation is going down. It's going up here. Why? The ONS says the inflation figures are driven by significant increases in household bills. We warned him repeatedly that this is exactly what would happen, what his policies would do. We called it Awful April. The Prime Minister came into office saying that he would tackle the cost of living crisis. He has failed. He hasn't got a clue, has he?
Mr. Speaker, she talks of their record, the disastrous Liz Truss mini-budget. Inflation through the work. They left a £22 billion black hole. Living standards at an all-time low. Energy prices through the roof. Mortgages through the roof. And, Mr. Speaker, we're taking measures to bring prices down. That EU deal will bring prices down. That's why supermarkets welcomed it. What did she do? She opposes measures to bring prices down.
Mr. Speaker, he needs to stop whining about what the last government did and look at what he is doing. He is the Prime Minister. Look at the numbers this morning. As if inflation figures weren't bad enough, we've also learned that the Deputy Prime Minister is on manoeuvres. He's lost control of the economy. He's lost control of his cabinet. She's sitting there staring at me. She knew exactly what she was doing when she briefed that into the papers. She is demanding, Mr. Speaker, 8 new tax rises, as if we haven't suffered enough. People out there are struggling. Businesses are struggling. People are losing their jobs. We cannot have more tax rises. Will the Prime Minister rule out new tax rises this year?
Mr. Speaker, she's not learned or changed. They lost the election because their appalling record on the NHS, on health, on prisons, you name it. And now she accuses everyone of whining about the impact that had on the country. It had a huge impact on working people across the country, and they're absolutely right to complain about it. She wants to talk about the Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister, working with the Chancellor, building 1.5 million new homes, reforming our planning system, putting £7 billion into our economy, and bringing forward our employment rights bill, which is the single biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation.
That's desperate stuff. The whole House would have heard the Prime Minister refuse to rule out new tax rises. The whole House heard it. He didn't rule it out. That his cabinet is open warfare. The Deputy Prime Minister clearly calling the shots. What is it that we've learned? We're heading for new tax rises. We know inflation is up. It's just more and more bad news from a Prime Minister who has lost control. So we heard his earlier answer, Mr. Speaker. We heard his earlier answer on winter fuel. Let's try and get some more information. I'm going to ask him a simple question. It only requires one word, yes or no. Is he planning to U-turn on winter fuel cuts?
Yes. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I made clear in my earlier answer that as the economy improves, we want to take measures that will impact on people's lives, and therefore we will look at the threshold, but that will have to be part of a fiscal event. But, Mr. Speaker, they lost control of every element of the economy, of prisons, the borders, the NHS, you name it. And now she's lost control of her party. They are sliding into oblivion. They will have to trade on their past, Mr. Speaker, because that's all they've got.
Speaker, I made it really easy for the Prime Minister. Just a simple question, yes or no. And he could not answer. I wonder how the public feel about a man who can't give a straight answer to a simple question. And you look at all of them behind him, all of them cheering, when this inevitable U-turn on winter fuel comes, and it will, from a desperate Prime Minister, what will he say to the 348 MPs who went over the top and voted for the winter fuel cut last September? Just like the British public, how can any of them ever trust him again?
Mr. Speaker, it's only because of the measures we've taken that the economy is improving. Growth at the highest rate since in the G7. 4 interest rate cuts, 3 trade deals because countries want to trade with this country because of the decisions that we've made. All of those decisions opposed by the party opposite. They've learned absolutely nothing and they're going absolutely nowhere.
Mr. Speaker, this is a Prime Minister who says he's taking measures. The jobs tax is killing jobs. Inflation is up. Business confidence is down. Everyone is worried. He promised to cut bills, but today we see they are rising because of his policies. He promised not to raise taxes on working people, but his jobs tax means people are losing their jobs. Every week we come here with a new company that is saying they are shedding jobs. That's on his watch. He promised to protect pensioners, but his winter fuel cut has driven thousands into hardship. His MPs hate this. He can't see them, but they all look sick just hearing what it is he's going to do. So let's wait until... Oh, yes, they're laughing. They're laughing. They're laughing.
I expect better from whips. And boys on at the back, I've got my eye on you. Get me there now.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order, sorry. Which one wants to leave first? If I hear it, there we are, they've got the first volunteer. Are you going to behave? Can we better?
Mr. Speaker, they are laughing just as they laughed at the budget. Hands up who here wanted winter fuel cuts. Hands up. Not a single one of them. Not a single one of them. The fact of the matter is, this Prime Minister is destroying them. They need to look at what they are doing to the country. The truth is, we all know that it's this Prime Minister, this Labour government, and their policies that are shafting the country, isn't it?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, they look in pretty good form to me, and there's lots of them. Mr. Speaker, she talks about business confidence. Yesterday, I didn't have time to read out the list of all the businesses that have come out in support of our EU deal. Mr. Speaker, I don't have time today. It's a long list. I went immediately to Lidl and spoke to the staff in Lidl. They're delighted with the deal we put forward yesterday. Business like the work we're doing. It's giving them confidence in the EU deal. She's opposed to each and every measure.
Louise Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Barrow Hill Primary School in my constituency of North East Derbyshire, a school in receipt of a new free breakfast club. The team there are doing a fantastic job, but challenges still remain. What more can we do as a government to support both them and local parents to give the children of Barrow Hill the start in life that they deserve?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and we are united by a shared focus on creating better life chances for our children. And I'm delighted to hear her constituents are already benefiting. Thanks to our plan for change, we'll deliver free breakfast clubs in every primary school in England. And I'm determined to support parents to give every child the best start in life. And that's why we're rolling out free childcare, expanding the first 300 school-based nurseries and delivering more family hubs.
Sir Ed David, the leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the terrible fire in Bicester last Thursday? I know from my honourable friend, the member for Bicester and Woodstock, how deeply the close-knit community there has been affected by this tragedy. And firefighters Martin Sadler and Jenny Logan were true heroes, as was Dave Chester. And I hope the full prayers and thoughts of the House are with their loved ones and with the 2 firefighters still in hospital. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly said that his new trade deals will give a much-needed boost to economic growth and thus to the public finances. So will the Prime Minister make sure that struggling families and pensioners see the benefits of the growth. He teased the House with his first answer to his honourable friend, the member for Luton North. So will he commit now to reversing his cuts to the winter fuel payment in full?
Mr. Speaker, firstly, can I just thank him for his comments about the Bicester tragedy. And it's very important that in a moment like this, the House does come together. And we are taking measures, obviously, to help with the cost of living crisis. And that's why the EU deal yesterday was so important, because the impact it will have on prices, particularly in supermarkets, directly affecting those who are affected by the cost of living crisis. Mr. Speaker, what I said before was this, that the economy is beginning to improve. People are still feeling the pressure. That's why we're taking the measures that we are. That's why we're striking the trade deals that we are striking. As that improves, I do want people to feel the benefit of the measures that we are taking. And that is why I want to ensure that more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel. It is important that, as you'd expect, that we are clear we can afford the decisions we're making, and that's why it will now be looked at a fiscal event.
Sherrod David.
Mr. Speaker, I think I welcome what the Prime Minister has said, but we will look at the details, and I hope he will use some of these new proceeds to help others like carers, because the government's changes to PIP will have big consequences for family carers, like Ginny, who cares for her husband Tim, who has myotonic dystrophy. Ginny holds her husband's hand to keep him steady as he walks. He falls frequently and chokes on his food. Ginny is the sole earner in the family. She works part-time on top of caring for Tim. But she's calculated that under the government's cuts, her family will lose £12,000 a year. So can the Prime Minister tell Ginny and many family carers like her, what does he expect them to do?
Mr. Speaker, we have approached this on the basis of the principles that we must support those who need support. On the question of getting people into work, that we should support people into work where they can work, and of course, where they can work, they should. But it is undeniably the case that the current arrangements don't work and need to be reformed. And that's why we're bringing forward reform, necessary reform, to ensure the system works better.
Annalise Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in this place, I read the victim impact statement Cheryl Corbell never got to say to her daughter's killer, Thomas Cashman, because he refused to face her in court. I made up Olivia's law past second reading, but until it gets royal assent, criminals can still not show up and deny victims justice. So will the Prime Minister commit to making sure Olivia's law becomes law as fast as possible?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for reading that victim impact statement? Because I know from talking to Cheryl just how hard it was for her to make that victim impact statement in the first place. It took a huge amount of courage and grief. And she wanted to read that statement to the perpetrator, as she should have been able to do. And I know how visceral the pain is to her of not being able to have done so from the meetings I've had with her. So I do thank my honourable friend for allowing that victim impact statement to be heard by the whole world, by being read out in this chamber. Cowards who commit these heinous crimes should face the consequences of their action and face those that have had a huge impact on their lives, and that's why we will force offenders to attend the sentencing hearings with longer sentences, unlimited fines and prison sanctions for those who seek to avoid facing justice. And I again pay tribute to Cheryl, who I will meet later on this afternoon, for having the incredible courage to push for that change, notwithstanding the incredibly painful impact it's had on her and her family.
Jim Allister.
The government assures us that Northern Ireland is still in the United Kingdom's customs union. If so, how is it then that British steel can be sold to the United States tariff-free, but if the same British steel is sold into Northern Ireland, it's subject to EU tariffs? Why on Monday did the Prime Minister not even try to take back control over the trade laws that govern Northern Ireland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we reduce tariffs on steel into the US market or other markets, including the EU markets, for obvious reasons. It is also vital that we seek to ensure that we reduce any barriers in trade within the United Kingdom as a whole. Yesterday was a step towards that. There's further work to do, but we do want to get to that place where we can trade without those barriers in the United Kingdom. We'll continue to work on that.
Andrew Pex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that thriving high streets are essential to local growth. But in cities like mine, people are increasingly concerned by the uncontrolled growth of betting shops and vape stores. Research shows this concern is not isolated. Nearly half of betting shops and gambling stores are in the 20% of places which are struggling the most, like Peterborough. So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he ask his departments to meet with me and campaigners so we can discuss ways that local communities like mine can take back control of our high streets?
My honourable friend is an excellent champion for his constituents, and we are committed to supporting our nation's high streets to adapt and thrive. Planning applications are required for any new betting office to make sure locals have a say on individual cases, and communities can use the planning system to allow for a change of use of their properties. And I will make sure that he gets the meeting that is asked for.
Michael. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, the EFRA Select Committee published its report on the Government's vision for agriculture. The committee agrees with the Government that land purchase being used to shelter wealth from inheritance tax is a problem that needs to be tackled. As a cross-party committee with a Government majority, however, we took the unanimous view that the Government's current proposals for inheritance tax reform will catch too many family farms who will simply not be able to pay the bill. We are asking for the changes to be paused and reworked. Will the Prime Minister listen to the Select Committee and those on his own benches who want to tackle tax evasion and support the farmers who keep producing food for the nation's table?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he knows the very limited impact of the inheritance tax, only on farmers of very, very high level. But he will also know the record amount of money we put in at the budget into farming, and of course the measures taken yesterday with the EU deal, which will massively help farmers selling their products into the EU market.
Julia Butley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Wrexham, Shropshire and Midlands Railway is on track to link North Wales and my Shrewsbury constituency directly to London with 5 trains daily, strengthening cross-border travel and fuelling this government's mission to drive economic growth. With 15 members from constituencies along the route already on board, will the Prime Minister support our journey and urge the Office for Rail and Road to give WSMR's open access application the green signal?
Mr. Speaker, our plan for change will see the railways reformed to deliver more reliable and better value services for passengers right across the country. My honourable friend has been a champion for better railways and easier journeys for her constituents. Open access operators have huge potential to offer passengers more choice. I'd be delighted to make sure that she and other interested MPs meet with the Rail Minister to put their case forward.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister might be a lawyer, trained to review evidence and reach judgment. So when he looks at the effects of his decisions, cutting the winter fuel payment, making pensioners poorer, damaging businesses with the jobs tax, decimating rural communities with the family farm tax, and risking our food security by selling off our fishing waters, surely he can review the evidence and see the verdict. Will the Prime Minister now throw these damaging policies out of his court once and for all before they do any more harm?
Well, the evidence is certainly coming in. Growth is the highest in the G7. 4 interest rates in a row, and trade deals with countries across the world who want to do deals with this country because they can see the stability that this government has brought about. Instability with them, stability and growth with this Labour government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is National Epilepsy Week, and we're joined in the gallery by England rugby player Tommy Freeman, who was diagnosed with epilepsy at 19. But through effective treatment has gone on to be selected for the British and Irish Lions, and I hope the Prime Minister will join me in congratulating him on that great achievement. Yeah. But for a third of epilepsy sufferers, seizures cannot be controlled by medication, like my constituent Ben Lacey, who suffers multiple seizures every single day. Ben will never be able to work, yet has been subject to the stress and uncertainty of multiple PIP reassessments. So will the Prime Minister reaffirm his commitment to ensuring that people like Ben with lifelong conditions who cannot work will be protected from these damaging reassessments and given the support they need to live with dignity?
Yeah. Well, can I begin by congratulating Tommy and everyone selected to represent the British and Irish Lions. It's an incredible achievement, and we'll be cheering them on. Mr. Speaker, it's important that we do protect those with severe disabilities or lifelong health conditions who can't work, paying them a premium and stopping those reassessments, which is part of the reform that we're bringing about. Ultimately, we also do need to get back to face-to-face assessments by trained assessors and health professionals, which fell to only 1 in 10 assessments under the last government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, keeps telling his gullible backbenchers, those over there, that he's deported 24,000 people from this country since he came into power. But he won't say who these people are. Now, it's my guess that they are people that came on work visas, students, and they are simply overstayers. But I'm willing, Mr. Speaker, to be proved wrong if you can answer one simple question. How many of these people that he's deported are failed asylum seekers that's come on small boats or on the back of lorries? Answer the question.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud that we've removed over 24,000 people. That's the highest record for nearly 10 years. We're taking other measures to get back control of our borders, including the Borders Bill, which gives our law enforcement enhanced powers, including terrorism-like powers. What did his party do? What did he do? He voted against them. And I'll tell you why he voted against them. Because they don't want to fix this problem. Because it benefits them. It benefits them not to fix it. Party before country. It's very good he's standing in for the member for Clacton, I have to say. There was no sign of him yesterday at the EU. So he was the first through the E-gates somewhere to south of France. Nice work if you can get it.
Christine Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's investment of £680 million into mental health support. Meanwhile, in Scotland, many children in my constituency of Bathgate and Linlithgow are stuck on an NHS Lothian neurodevelopmental waiting list, which was only recently seeing patients referred in March 2022. This delay can lead to poor mental health, with children ending up on a CAMHS waiting list too. How will the Prime Minister work with devolved governments to ensure faster diagnosis and greater support so that no child across these aisles grows up on a waiting list?
Well, I thank her for her question. She rightly raises the broken promises of the SNP on mental health services powerfully. It is important, and we will have positive discussion with devolved governments to work on addressing mental health waiting times. But look, the SNP promised to invest in frontline mental health services, then cut them by £54 million in real terms this year. Now, with a record settlement in the budget, 2 decades in power, the SNP are out of excuses and out of ideas, and Scotland deserves better than that.
If the Prime Minister agrees that the Israeli government starving children to death is monstrous, why does he think it's OK for the UK to continue to sell Israel the equipment for the fighter jets to drop bombs on these starving children?
What we contribute into a pot is parts for fighter jets. And if we were to stop that, they couldn't be used by other countries in the other conflicts, including those in which we are involved. It doesn't know the detail at all. They're not sold directly. They go into a pot. If we were to stop that, they wouldn't then be available to others around the world who desperately need them in the conflicts they're engaged in. And that's why we won't do it.
Cat Ettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Dementia Gateway, my constituency of Stourbridge, was recently at risk of closure following £42 million worth of budget cuts by the Conservative-run Dudley Council. The Gateway is a vital service for dementia patients and their carers, providing daytime activities, advice and support from trained advisors, and following a well-fought campaign with cross-party support, the Dementia Gateway has been saved. So this Dementia Action Week, would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Lisa and the campaigners? And does he agree with me that services like the Dementia Gateway in Stourbridge are essential and support the government's mission to provide quality care in our communities close to home?
Yeah. Well, can I thank my honourable friend and celebrate Lisa and all those who've saved this important source of local support. The party opposite left local councils on the brink, unable to provide these vital services, letting down patients across the country. We are committed to improving dementia care through our Plan for Change, which is why we provided £69 billion boost for local government, invested £26 billion in the NHS, and made £3.7 billion available for social care, including an £880 million increase in the social care grant.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree that imprisoning Lucy Connolly, a young mother with a 12-year-old daughter, for one foolish social media post, soon deleted, is clearly not an efficient or fair use of prison?
Mr. Speaker, sentencing is a matter for our courts, and I celebrate the fact that we have independent courts in this country. I am strongly in favour of free speech. We've had free speech in this country for a very long time, and we protect it fiercely. But I'm equally against incitement to violence against other people. And I will always support the action taken by our police and courts to keep our streets and people safe.
Paul Foster.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recently visited St Catherine's Hospice in Lostock Hall, which serves wonderfully my constituents of South Ribble, those of Ribble Valley, and some of your constituents of Chorley, Mr. Speaker. I discovered, speaking to them, that they have to pay in excess of £350,000 a year for medication, and it can only be sourced from the private sector, not the NHS. Doing some investigating, I found there's an ICB postcode lottery out there. Some ICBs fully fund and supply our medication, some subsidise, some don't supply it at all. There's also a disparity where evidence supports that hospices in the more deprived areas aren't funded, those in the more affluent areas are funded. Would the Prime Minister please speak with the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care as a matter of urgency and get free medication supplied by all ICBs to all hospices across the country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have put record amounts into the NHS in the budget, and we're beginning to see the results of that. I accept the point he makes, and we will look again to make sure the money is properly used in the most efficient way.
We're a Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A month ago, I was denied entry into Hong Kong on a private visit. At the absence of any explanation, this seems to hint at a hidden blacklist aimed to silence any MP who speaks up against human rights abuses from the Chinese government. Many of us from any political party. Does he agree with me that this is an attack on all of us? And will he personally seek reassurances from the Hong Kong authorities that no British parliamentarian will be denied entry in this way again?
Well, can I thank her? Her experience is deeply concerning, and I know it must have affected her. I think she was hoping to see and later saw her grandchild, but it must have impacted on her, and it is deeply concerning. We need to recognise that. Ministers have raised it, including the Foreign Secretary, on numerous occasions with their counterparts both in China and Hong Kong, preventing UK citizens, including members of Parliament, from entering Hong Kong without justification, or for simply expressing their views, is completely unacceptable, and it will only undermine Hong Kong's international reputation and the relationship that we have with them. And so we will continue to raise it.
John MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, you will know that I've raised on several occasions in the House the case of
Alaa Abd El Fattah, the British-Egyptian human rights campaigner, who for several years now, many years now, has been imprisoned in Egypt, and whose mother, Layla, went on a 100-day hunger strike. I want to thank the Prime Minister for fulfilling his promise to contact the President Sisi of Egypt to secure Alaa's release. But unfortunately, months on now, and Alaa remains in prison, and Layla this week has started her hunger strike again. Could I appeal to him to speak directly again to President Sisi to secure Alaa's release?
Well, can I thank him for raising this, not just today, but on the many occasions that he has. It is incredibly important that we do everything we can in this case. I have met Layla and given her my commitment to do everything I possibly can. I have had a number of contacts myself, but I'm not going to stop doing everything within my power to secure release.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister join me in welcoming my constituent Teddy, who is 6 years old, and with his mum Laura, who've come to see us today at Prime Minister's Questions. Teddy is a self-professed eco-warrior on a mission to change the world. He started out by saving thousands of plastic chocolate and sweet tubs from landfill because they're not currently recyclable. Will the Prime Minister commit to ask his Minister for Local Government to meet with Teddy and myself to discuss how we make these tubs recyclable? And does he agree with me that no matter how small you are never too little to make a big difference?
Well, can I welcome Teddy on my behalf and on behalf, I think, of the whole House. It is really incredible that Teddy has done so much already and is in the gallery somewhere. Many of us struggle for a whole lifetime to make an impact on government policy. Teddy is already age 6, having an impact, and I'll make sure that he gets to speak to the relevant minister.
Final question, Rosie Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from my honourable friend, I also want to mark that this week is National Epilepsy Week, an important opportunity to raise awareness of a condition that affects so many but often remains invisible. Epilepsy comes with fear and uncertainty, the anxiety of having a seizure, the impact of losing a driving licence, and the worry about medication shortages. In the UK, 1 in 100 people live with epilepsy. That's up to 6 of us in this chamber, including myself. So today I ask the Prime Minister, will he join me and the inspiring campaigners watching from the gallery in marking National Epilepsy Week as we continue to raise awareness of seizures?
Well, can I congratulate my honourable friend for her tireless campaigning on this issue and those campaigners who are with us today. I know the impact epilepsy has on people across the country, including on over 100,000 children and young people. We are committed to improving care for people with neurological conditions and setting up UK-wide Neuroforum to improve treatment and care for those with such conditions.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
And that does bring us to the end of this session of Prime Minister's Questions, the final one before the recess next week. Let me welcome our guests for this part of Politics Live. For the Government, the Arts Minister, Chris Bryant. For the Opposition, for the Conservatives, Helen Whately, Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, and the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, Vicki Young. Well, and it doesn't happen very often, there was a major piece of news announced by the Prime Minister at the very beginning of this session of PMQs. We were discussing just yesterday with Henry Zeffman, the BBC's chief political correspondent, when he said that he understood there were high-level, top-level discussions going on in government about reviewing the policy of cutting winter fuel payments to millions of pensioners. And 24 hours later, the Prime Minister performs an about-turn, a government U-turn on that policy to state that more pensioners will be eligible for winter fuel payments. They've looked at it, and that is the decision. They will flesh out that policy at the next fiscal event, probably the budget. Let's just have a listen to what he had to say.
We want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. As you would expect, Mr. Speaker, we will only make decisions we can afford. That is why we will look at that as part of a fiscal event.
That is a pretty significant announcement. Vicky, what did you make of it?
Yep, it certainly is. As you say, it had been rumoured for a while, but here is the Prime Minister announcing it, not the detail, of course, but at Prime Minister's questions. So just to clarify, yes, a fiscal event, that does not mean the spending review. So this will be the budget in the autumn, but crucially, of course, that is before the winter for those payments. He did have a slight caveat there, it's only what we can afford. So what we don't know is, will it be a full reversal? Or will it be a tweaking where more become eligible? So the current situation is that if you earn as a pensioner more than 11,500, you don't qualify for the winter fuel allowance. So, will they change that cap? That's quite complicated. The Treasury would probably be looking for an existing threshold, if you like. It makes it a lot simpler to do. Could they say that if you are a 40% taxpayer as a pensioner, that you no longer get it? That's around 1 million pensioners now. Obviously doesn't save as much. And remember, this is a policy that so many Labour MPs have been against. They felt that it really was one of the main reasons they did so badly at the local elections. It came up on the doorstep again and again, completely unprompted, partly because it was one of the first things that the government announced in isolation. It got an awful lot of attention. It saves around £1.4 billion a year, although not actually that much, because more have now started claiming pensioner credit. Interesting, I think, as well, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, one of her first announcements, she wasn't there today. She is on the way to Canada for a G7. But, this is pretty humiliating and embarrassing for her as well. We'll have to now see what the actual detail is, whether it is a full reversal, which is a bit dangerous this early in a parliament. One of your first announcements, if you reverse that in full, I think that there will be lots of other Labour MPs thinking, well, that means that other policies are up for grabs.
Chris, was it the right decision to U-turn on cuts to winter fuel payments to pensioners?
I'm really pleased that Keir has announced what he's done today, and obviously it does depend on the fiscal situation later on this year. And as you say, it depends on whether we've got enough money in the pot to be able to which will determine precisely what we're able to do. But look, I'd be lying to you if I said nobody's ever raised it on the doorstep, because hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have raised it on the doorstep in my own constituency, in Rhondda and Ogmore, in Runcorn, in mayoral elections. It's a key thing. And I don't think there are many people who think that it should go to millionaires and so on.
But was it the wrong policy then in the first place? Was it the wrong policy to announce cuts to pensioners in winter fuel payments to pretty well most of them in the way that the government did?
Well, I think you have to remember the situation, back last July, not all that long ago, really, I suppose, which is, I don't know whether you play rugby, but there's a...
I don't, actually, just for the record.
Well, there's no reason why you don't.
No.
The women's rugby teams are doing phenomenally well.
Or football.
But the point I was going to make was that there's a term in rugby which is a hospital pass. I think lots of people would acknowledge that the last general election gave us the worst hospital pass in history, economically.
But it didn't mean that you had to make a decision in the way that you did. All I'm trying to say is you've welcomed it. So it was the wrong decision to make, wasn't it? Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a U-turn.
I think what everybody would have preferred is if we would have been able, at that moment, to introduce a system which didn't give it to millionaires, but had some kind of higher threshold. And the point has already been made. It's not easy to come up with a system that gives you another threshold, because if you end up spending more money on working out the system than on giving the money to people, then that's a bit of an own goal.
Would you like a full reversal? But would you like a full reversal of the policy?
Well, I'm not, funnily enough, going to write Rachel's budget for later on this year. All of this depends on the fiscal situation, and I'm very conscious as a minister. I'm in two departments. We've got big budgetary decisions that we've got to make over the next few weeks, and there is not a lot of money around. Right. So all of that has to be bear in mind. But look, the fundamental point, I've managed to get quite a lot of people in my patch onto pension credit because they didn't know that they were entitled to it. They've never been claiming it.
But they'll no doubt be delighted the more people do.
But I do think, and I've always thought that it's important that more people, precisely as the Prime Minister said earlier, more people should be in receipt, so the threshold should rise.
Helen Whaley, you must be delighted that there is going to be a change and a U-turn on this policy so that more pensioners will keep or get back their winter fuel payment.
Well, the fundamental point here is that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves got this wrong, and they shouldn't have done what they did with the winter fuel payment. So, yes, for the sake of pensioners, who I hope will therefore be more likely to get it next winter, it is a good thing that he's done this U-turn, but fundamentally he's doing this U-turn because they got it wrong in the first place. They made that mistake. And having made that mistake, got that wrong, that meant that millions of pensioners last winter didn't get their winter fuel payment, including 750,000 of the poorest pensioners. We saw hospital admissions soar for older people. So they've already had to go through that really tough winter, and people won't get that back.
Right.
And actually, I think, yes, right to do the U-turn, but the Prime Minister and the Chancellor should be apologising to all those pensioners who had such a hard winter last winter without the winter fuel payment.
Should they apologise?
I think we did what we had to do. There comes a point sometimes when you're putting together budgets where there are some things that you have to do and you'd prefer to do something
But this was ahead of a budget.
Well, that's an important point, actually. This is highly technical.
Well, all right, let's park that. Go back to... No, don't bother.
All right. Can I just ask another question, though? So would you reverse it? You're not guaranteed you would have reversed it,
So the point is, he shouldn't have done it. It's not something that we would have done.
And would you reverse it?
So I think there is, amazingly, some level of consensus, and that has been said, that there are some people at the highest levels of income who have said, well, they don't necessarily think that they need it. But the point is, what your Prime Minister got wrong, what the country's Prime Minister got wrong, what your Chancellor got wrong, was what they did, which was slashing it the way they did, putting the threshold so low, so that hundreds of thousands of the poorest pensioners did not get it. And you've talked about pension credit.
Were actually protected.
No, they weren't, because there are around 800,000 pensioners who are not on pension credit, who still didn't sign up to pension credit, who therefore lost out on getting that
your government refused to get people onto pension credit. You were trying to let it die.
We did a huge amount of work to get people onto pension credit.
Oh, come off it. No, you didn't.
Your Chancellor and your Secretary of State for Work and Pensions knew when this was announced is actually many people don't want to or don't manage to get onto pension credit.
Helen, answer that question, otherwise he'll keep asking it. Would you reverse it in full? Would you propose to reverse it in full?
Look, we want to... Well, first of all, let's see what they come up with. So we've heard from the Prime Minister that he's going to U-turn on it. He's going to make it different.
You could be on principle say we want it reversed in its entirety.
So I think what we've been absolutely clear is we think it shouldn't have been taken away from millions of those poorest pensioners.
Okay.
And the point is about getting the answer right now. Let's see what the Prime Minister...
But do you agree with the principle of means testing it?
So I think we agree with the point that there are some people who've been receiving it. And I've had these conversations with people, some people who would say, well, it's not something that they relied on for their heating. But I also have had conversations with many, many people who said they have really struggled this winter without it.
So 13,000, 15,000, 18,000, 20,000.
What would you like?
We've just said that we're going to look at it and we'll come back to you with the budget.
What do you think? Would 15,000 be better?
Because I'm being told that this was the wrong decision, and I presume, therefore, you've costed how you would find the extra money.
No, we had said we wouldn't have done it.
So where would the money come from?
And do you know what would have been different? And one of the things that has changed since you guys have been in government is that the economy has gone in the wrong direction on so many metrics. Under you guys,
fastest growing economy in the G7.
Of course you were going to say that, and we handed over to you the fastest growing economy in the G7, and then we saw growth go down. Yes, of course, it is a good thing that growth is now going up again, but it's half.
Under you.
The OPR has half the forecast of what growth was going to be for this year. Growth is much lower than it would have been under us.
All right.
Coupled with the fact that unemployment, you can quote, unemployment has been going up under your watch. Unemployment is 10% higher than it was when the general election happened.
The bit that I don't think works...
150,000, you keep talking over me, 150,000 more people unemployed as a result of your government. Many things going in the wrong direction.
Can I just interject at this point, because we'll come to some of the figures that you are talking about. But it did actually, on balance, in terms of the questions posed by Kemi Badenoch. Curiously, she didn't respond, the Leader of the Opposition, immediately to the big news that the Prime Minister was announcing this U-turn. Perhaps you can comment on that too. But it was very much a sort of knockabout on the economy in a sort of traditional Punch and Judy session that we have come to expect in years gone by.
Yeah, and I think, it obviously was a bit of a problem for Kemi Badenoch that she didn't seem to hear what he'd said twice, actually, before she came out. It is noisy. And then eventually she sort of referred to his first answer, but then asked him, are you going to U-turn, yes or no? And, of course, he sort of already said he was going to change his policy. So, that didn't really help. What she was trying to do was to, make the most of some of the discussions and debates that are going on in the Labour Party, not least Angela Rayner or her department. It turns out that they were calling for tax rises ahead of the spring statement. So there is that debate going on in Labour. You know, why not relax your fiscal rules so that we don't have to make these decisions which are, you know, harming some pensioners, they would say, and raising, which isn't an awful lot of money in the end. You know, we should be looking at things differently about taxing the wealthier. So that is what Kemi Badenoch is trying to attack Labour on, but seemed to slightly miss the big story in front of her.
What does it say about Rachel Reeves's judgment? That she made this policy in the first place, that it's taken months. Yes, the opposition, Liberal Democrats as well as the Conservatives, but it's actually been the opposition from within the Labour Party itself, within the parliamentary party, MP after MP, particularly after the local elections, saying that this policy was against Labour values.
Well, we faced a very difficult position, and we had to make the budget, that we had to make the numbers add up. And it was one of the few things that we could do that would happen within the year. Now, look, I mean, I would much prefer that, as the Prime Minister has said today, if there was a higher threshold. And I think that that's the... But I get the impression that that's the general consensus, that it shouldn't be going to millionaires.
Was it a misjudgment by the Chancellor in the first place?
No, I don't think it was.
Because of the revolt within the Labour Party.
Well, there's always going to be debates about all these financial measures, especially at a time when finances for individual families, let alone for government, are really, really tough. And I know in the two departments that I'm in, we've got to face very difficult decisions over the next few weeks in the spending review. So all of that, I fully support Rachel's position. And the one thing I would say is that in the end, it's not good enough for an opposition party to say, spend more money here, spend more money here, spend more money here, and then not just... Now, you criticise me for talking over you.
Okay.
It's not good enough to say spend more money left, right and centre and then at the same time say and cut taxes and don't support the taxes that we've introduced. That simply doesn't work and it doesn't wash with voters.
So firstly, I mean, you guys had choices, but you made the wrong choices. Your Chancellor, your Prime Minister were incompetent on this. They made the wrong choices. So, for instance, they chose to cut the winter fuel payment while making huge payments to the train drivers and increasing the pay
and we stopped the strikes.
And caving into the unions.
We stopped the strikes. We got the NHS back on its feet so that people could actually start working in the NHS and people could and we could get down there.
Actually, let her respond. No. You increased the pay to train drivers and then you also then had strikes. You didn't stop the strikes on that. Increased pay to your union mates and then cut the winter fuel payment for all those pensioners.
You had the worst record for decades on strike.
You guys,
days lost to strikes in the country.
You made those choices.
All right,
they were the wrong choices.
Helen, on that, let me just show you this general election voting intention tracking poll. BBC average polling intention, Reform on 30%, Labour on 22%, the Conservatives on 18%. It is perhaps why former Conservative Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg called last night for an electoral pact between Reform and the Conservatives. Let's just have a listen.
I'm saying that most people in the Conservative Party, most people in Reform, broadly share the same views, the same desire for the country. We saw yesterday the country being sold down the river, putting in the command and control of the European Union once again. People in Reform and the Conservative Party don't want that. If we oppose each other, we let Labour win large majorities, and that makes no sense. So we want to come together, we want to cooperate, we want to put the national interest ahead of party pride.
If we oppose each other, we let Labour win large majorities. Do you agree with him? If you did have some sort of electoral pact with Reform, you'd keep Labour out?
So I don't agree with him, and I think the Conservative Party and Reform are different. We have very different positions, for instance, on the economy and about fiscal responsibility and sound money and living within our means. And I would say, yes, I know, I listened to what we heard from voters at the last general election. We heard again at the local election. You know, people have not forgiven us for some of the things that they didn't like when we were in power. But no, we have to do the hard yards now of showing to people who we are. We're under new leadership. We're working hard on the policies that we want to put to the country at the next election. Meanwhile, we've got Keir Starmer running the economy down, making the wrong decisions, and hitting people's pockets with higher bills, with higher inflation, all those things. And we want to show to the country that we will do a better job. And we need to take the time between now and the next election to do that.
When are you going to flesh out policies on the economy, for example?
So the work on policy is happening, but we want to do the hard thinking. No, the fact is there are difficult questions questions for the country to answer, and we need to come up with the right answers, not make policy on the hoof. It's some years to the next election. We're taking the time, we're working on exactly these things. I'm looking, for instance, at our welfare policy. I think Labour's policy on welfare is all wrong. They're getting a lot of criticism.
You don't agree with the £5 billion of cuts to working age benefits?
They're, on the one hand, not saving enough. On the other hand, where they are particularly cutting money is in some of the support for seriously disabled people who will really struggle to afford the basic costs because of the cuts they're making. So they're getting that wrong. Welfare needs proper, hard, thought-out reform, not that what they're doing, which is the worst of all worlds.
Can you afford to wait much longer when you see those sorts of polls? Yes, they are polls and we are some way off the next general election. But the difference here is reform and the way they're polling and the success that they achieved at those local elections. Can you understand why some Conservatives see it as attractive, the option of a pact with reform?
So what I would say to people who see that as the answer is actually it's not that long ago since the general election, and I was on the doorstep at the local elections clearly. I heard from people who are still saying that they were unhappy with some of the things that happened under us.
Do they like Kemi Badenoch?
It will take time. I mean, I've worked clearly alongside Kemi. I think she's a fantastic leader.
And the people on the doorstep?
Really good. And there are people who've heard her and been, for instance, tuning in to some of her speeches, PMQs. Actually, really like, one of the things I like about her is that she speaks her mind. She's straight talking. She has principles. This is what people want from our politicians. I'd say give us time and we will come back with the offer for the country.
I mean, one of the questions that she raised or said to Keir Starmer today, stop whining about the last government. This is now on your watch. How long do you think it's going to be until the Labour government stops saying it's all their fault, we are accountable for the decisions that we've made, and you turned on?
Well, we are accountable for the decisions that we make, but we also make them against the background of what has happened in the past. And they spent 14 years whining about what we did when we were in government. So I think we're maybe allowed at least 14 months. Look, I don't think there'll be a Conservative Party in 10 years in the UK. I think they will be gone.
That's what people said when you guys had Jeremy Corbyn as your
indeed.
leader.
And you've now got the equivalent of Jeremy Corbyn as your leader. That's precisely what I was thinking when I was watching PMQs earlier. Because, anyway, the point I was going to make was that I think the thing that the Conservative Party has yet to show that it has learnt is that if you offer to spend lots more money and don't say where the money's coming from, which is precisely what Liz Truss is, then you are stuffed.
Except I suppose you could say, yes, Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, and people thought then perhaps the Labour Party would struggle. For 5 years later, they were back in government. Is that what you think will happen here with Kemi Badenoch?
That's my suspicion. But look, it's not for me to decide in the end. But I can see a trajectory. And the truth is that I remember in the Jeremy Corbyn years, I said to colleagues, we don't have the right even to be Her Majesty's opposition if we can't command the respect of the voters. And to command the respect of the voters, you have to do the hard yards. And I think that's what Keir did in terms of changing the
I
Labour
see,
Party.
and we saw the debate of this at PMQs, and we've seen this leaked memo from Angela Rayner saying that she wants 8 more tax rises. The trajectory I see is you guys doing the same old thing that Labour always does in government, which is you don't understand the economy, you don't understand businesses, we've got unemployment going up, we've got higher taxes, we've got your colleagues lobbying for higher taxes still. The Prime Minister didn't say there wouldn't be more tax rises coming up. Those are all the things going in the wrong direction.
Yesterday congratulating us on getting 3 big trade deals in a row, which you all tried to get and you couldn't.
All right. Well, let's talk about something completely different.
If you surrender to the people you're negotiating with,
let me try.
no surprises, you can get a deal.
Just in the last few minutes of the programme, viewers may have seen Elton John and James Graham, the playwright, on Laura Kunsberg's show on Sunday. They're very angry and very upset that the government has not put in place protections, copyright protections for creative artists, musicians. Let's have a listen to Elton John.
When they're creative and it comes from the human soul and not a machine, because a machine isn't capable of writing anything with any soul in it, if you've got to get rid of that and you're going to rob young people of their legacy and their income, it's a criminal offence, I think. I think the government are just being absolute losers.
Are you being a loser, Chris? You're supposed to represent the creative industries. Have you spoken to Elton John?
I've spoken to David Furnish, actually, his partner, husband, and James Graham, who was also in that interview with him, is coming in to see me tomorrow. Look, I mean, I completely agree with the first half of what Elton says, which is human creativity is the source of what everybody appreciates in drama and music and everything else, and we want to protect that. We're absolutely determined to get to a place where creators can protect their rights
against artificial intelligence, in case I haven't made it clear.
Yes. Against artificial intelligence companies when they're trying to scrape their works for their large language models.
Yeah.
We're determined to get there. I think we should do that legislation in the round rather than piecemeal in the bill that's before Parliament, which is Elton's concern.
But why are they so anxious? They obviously don't trust you on this whole
because it feels
AI debate.
No, because it feels apocalyptic for them. I fully understand that.
Of
course, they worry, and in some regards, that their jobs will just completely disappear. And I get that, and we are determined to work on getting to a better place. And that's why I've been talking to people working in the creative industries. It's different from music and for word and for images. I want to get to a place where AI companies pay the creative industries for the work that they're using, because otherwise they won't have good material.
All right, before we go, tomorrow is my last day, final day at the BBC, and my last Politics Live as the programme's presenter, so it seemed a good opportunity to talk a little bit about my successor, who is here, Vicki Young. Welcome to you, familiar, of course, to the programme and BBC audiences in general. Vicki, when are you starting?
So start after the recess on Monday, the 2nd of June. And like you, passionate about politics. And I think what we all want is to know what our politicians are up to hold them to account. And that is what you have done so brilliantly for so many years.
Oh, well, I'll take the flattery. It's going to be busy.
Well,
oh, no. Surely we haven't got time for whatever it is, Chris.
All I wanted to say... So I've been on the programme many times with you, Jo, and you're doing that face again. It's one of your favourite faces. And all I would say, in the words of Julius Caesar, is forever and forever for farewell. If we do meet again, then we shall smile. If not, why then... this parting was well made.
Oh, well, I'm very touched. That was very, very poetic. Thank you to both of you. Thank you very much for that tribute. I've loved it all, but there will be more of this tomorrow. I'm sorry about that. I'll be back at 12:15. Bye-bye. Yeah.